Banks and institutions, they are aware of these risks, these real physical risks that we see evolving all around the world. But the problem, of course, is short-term profits. Investing further in fossil fuels, for example, are too lucrative now. And the problem, so to speak, that they feel are not imminent enough, are not like present enough.
Well, Alex, it's great to meet you. Thank you very much for joining us here in Copenhagen.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
We're looking forward to the conversation today. So let's just start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So I'm Alex. I am heading Normative Science, Sustainability and Climate Research Department. That means I'm responsible, you can say, pretty much for Normative's scientific integrity, as we call it, which is super important for us and, of course, our clients as well.
Right. Okay. Now, I understand that Normative recently released a white paper that discussed some findings where there were some numbers indicating that the targets for sustainability in financial services have quadrupled in recent years. Why is that happening?
Yeah, it's very interesting development there. So we have seen a real uptick in science-based targets in general, but especially in finance over these past few years. And I feel there are several like push and pull factors. To keep it short, push factors clearly are regulations. They are ramping up, especially in the finance space, a lot. And also investors, they do demand institutions to disclose their carbon emissions. But the same investors, they're also willing to pay a premium on companies with a positive ESG record. So that's a pull factor. There's so much incentive out there for institutions, for actors of the financial services industry to actually take the lead in the whole net zero transition.
All right, so we see the push and the pull. But what are the main challenges that companies that actually want to engage with these targets are facing when trying to implement them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is data. It's so difficult for institutions, for actors of the financial services industry to get the right data, actually. Not just to follow through with the targets, but also to be compliant. So there's a huge gap between what regulators demand and what companies often can deliver. And the big blind spot is usually the financed emissions, the so-called finance emissions. So you can say it's what investors, what actors of the industry enable through their financing in terms of emissions elsewhere.
All right, so let me just press on that because you mentioned that your role is to maintain the scientific integrity of what Normative does, and at the same time you're telling us that there's a data issue. We also hear there's all different sorts of standards flooding the market. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's complex. So bear with me here. So on one hand, we have a complex web of legislation, standards, etc., that companies have to wrap their heads around. I mean, it is ultimately no rocket science, but the problem is that sometimes companies are lost when they try to do it on their own, especially because some of the regulations are not fully fleshed out yet. So they might have certain demands, but then there are certain protocols missing for actually how to implement calculations in, for example, financed emissions. So we from Normative side, we of course help companies to actively engage with their investments, so with their value chain, you can say, to get these data. Because, I mean, we don't have the data without them, but engaging their value chain, engaging their investments, their customers, that actually brings the right data to the table that they need to then follow through with commitments, but also regulations.
Right, okay, and can you maybe give us some examples of what some of these financial institutions are doing in order to adhere to the standards or to implement these initiatives?
I think we have two very good examples among our partners within Normative. So we are partnering with Nordea, the big Nordic bank, since end of last year, and they are enabling their business customers, the business clients, so other businesses, to screen their own emissions, to then enable Nordea to assess, okay, how far in are they on their net zero journey? So Nordea can also then play sustainable finance products for these usually smaller companies. The second example is Zurich Insurance Group, very similar case. They have an ambitious target of until 2030 that 75% of their procurement spend, so companies they're purchasing things from, 75% should have science-based targets established until 2030. So this is super important that they then also help these customers, help these businesses to screen their own emissions. And that's what Normative is supporting them with.
Right, now, let me press a little bit on this, because the whole idea of reporting carbon emissions and then complying with regulation, it seems sometimes a little bit like there's a regulatory framework that is forcing companies to adopt certain certain business practices. Shouldn't this be just in the best interest of companies, and shouldn't they decide what to do with their companies just in the interest of maximizing their profit and maybe servicing their customers and ensuring that they remain relevant in the market?
I would agree with you in general. The problem is there's this big time lag between what they're doing now and what effects this has on the environment and on kind of the whole planet. And the problem is banks and institutions, they are aware of these risks, these real physical risks that we see evolving all around the world. But the problem, of course, is short-term profits. Investing further in fossil fuels, for example, are too lucrative now. And the problem, so to speak, that they feel are not imminent enough, are not like present enough, but they are there. So regulations kind of try to decrease this lag time, if you want. They need to make it more clear, hey, you need to act now. Because even, I mean, there's this example, right? Even if we turned off all the fossil fuels, kind of the emissions today, the environment the atmosphere will keep warming up over the next decades. So we need to act now to prevent 20, 30-year-out events.
Right. Okay. Now, could you maybe help us with some examples of trends that we're seeing in this space of sustainable finance? Because we hear the term a lot, but maybe help us land it in tangible examples.
Yeah, I think it became some kind of like a buzzword, right? Like
yes.
Almost like AI and others right now. So I think what we see, I mean, I don't want to define it here like thoroughly, but the trends we see in general, like whatever you call it, sustainable investments. First, we saw a big wave of commitments. I think latest started 2 years ago with the COP26, the big UN conference in Glasgow. From this emerged the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, with now 160 or more institutions counting among the members. So there was a commitment wave. And now we are at this crossroads of, hey, now you have to move from commitments to actually delivering on your commitments. And there we see this like one actor group, they're pushing forward. They are, what we said, Nordic, Zurich, they're screening their value chains for emissions and doing the right thing. Others are hesitant. Others don't know yet like which step is the right one to take, and have still, as I said, very much misaligned portfolios, so investments that don't really speak to their commitment of becoming net zero.
Right. And tell me a little bit about the risks that companies face if they fail to meet their targets.
I mean, let us start where we left off, the physical risks, right? So institutions, I mean, ultimately banks, financial actors, they all have to manage risks. And we already see a lot of flood events, for example, a lot of physical risks that really endanger their own investments. So speaking about their own business interest, there's a real physical risk they need to take care of, triggered by climate change. But now, of course, the other risks come from not having targets, not following through in your commitments. Regulations are really cracking down on greenwashing as well in this space. So if you have gone out and set a commitment, and then you have these nice marketing slogans around we are, green, whatever, then you have to now actually pull up data to substantiate these claims in the UK and in the EU as well. So there are going to be also risk of non-compliance or inaction, if you want.
And what can they do to mitigate these risks?
Maybe we can break it down. You have to inform yourself first. Like I'm a big fan of, you shouldn't set audacious goals without knowing what they actually entail. So inform yourself and understand. Second step, like what is going on, what are my legal boundaries, etc. The third step is then you have to get the data at hand, because without data, how could you go out and say, I'm going to be net zero by 2050? We want you to be there, yes. But you need to have the data. So again, that's what we do with our clients, right? We help them to get the insights, and then of course they take the action.
Maybe just to understand a little bit how Normative helps close the circle. So you help clients with data. Do you also work with them in helping them understand what to do with the data, and then how to implement what follows after they get the insight?
That is so important. I mean, first and foremost, we are a software company. We have a platform that companies access, and then they can upload the data. They get all the insights out of the platform. But it is not yet a field that is self-explanatory, if you want. Meaning, companies, oftentimes, they don't have a well-established sustainability department. So we have dedicated climate strategy advisors for each of our customer accounts to help them first understand what data to gather. I mean, where to start to begin with, right? And then when we have the data analyzed by our automated tool, then you go into insights workshop and say, okay, here are your hotspots. I don't want you to run around recycling office paper if that is not your biggest hotspot. I want you to engage usually suppliers, value chain, or in terms of finance, your financed emissions. So you need to have that certain advisory support to know where is the bigger bang for the buck, if you want.
Right. Alex, just to close, tell us what's Normative's vision for this space?
The vision for us clearly is to make known and reduce the sustainability impact of all economic activities on the planet. So that starts in the small. For each of our customers, need to make transparent all of the emissions and then reducing it down to zero. I think ultimately the bigger challenge is, and our vision in that sense is to really connect all the dots and pieces into one network where they actually can tap into the data that they need and that would empower them to take the right action to become net zero by 2050.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you very much. That's very insightful. You're going to be on stage at Nordic Fintech Week in September. Tell us a little bit more about what we can expect from your session.
Yes, I'm really excited about it. You just mentioned at the beginning, I think, a white paper around financial services industry and what are the challenges. We have co-authored this with CDP and others, so really institutions that have gathered a lot of experience and data in this space. And we are very, very excited to bring the insights to people of the industry. So, as I said, how can they inform themselves, how can they understand the different steps, and how can then take informed action based on data?
Well, Alex, we're very excited to have you and looking forward to hearing what you have to say at the end of September.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you.